It's incredibly easy to pin down the early inspirations for death metal, and I've spoken about those plenty of times on this channel. Rain and Blood, Black Metal, Kill 'Em All, Hell Awaits, and of course Seven Churches are all incredibly instrumental in the creation and foundation of death metal. But many often point to Scream Bloody Gore as the first real death metal album, and I'm hard pressed to disagree, though I have my own personal theories about what the real first death metal album was. Death metal really didn't take off with the likes of Scream Bloody Gore and Seven Churches and Seasons of the Dead by Necrophagia in 1986 and 87. It wasn't until 1998 with the release of Death's Leprosy that death metal truly took off and became what it was always meant to be. Everything about this album would come to epitomize death metal, building on the foundation that came before it. Early death metal was all about the slow rot of the guitars with creepy overtones that were reminiscent of the theme song from The Exorcist and other horror movies of its time like Halloween. Let's have a quick listen to the self-titled track that opens this album. Think back to 1988 when you just walked into that record store, grabbed Leprosy off the shelf, and got home all excited to throw it in your LP player. And the title track comes on with the incredibly creepy descent into hell that those guitars bring. The primitive thud of those drums fill your body with this sense of awe that's undeniable and unmatched at the time. And then Chuck's voice comes in with that early death metal drawl. Man, there's nothing like it. That whole first song alone could be argued to lay the groundwork for all death metal to come, with the chorus picking up into an incredibly fast riff that takes its thrash metal influence and takes it a string or two higher to give it that eerie signature death metal sound. Then Born Dead wastes no time in building on that speed and bringing it to the next level, cementing you in your place and letting you know who the true kings of this scene were going to be for the next 10 years. And Chuck's playing is so simple but so powerful on those first two songs, and it really shows the groundwork that he was creating for death metal going forward. He took that early knuckle-dragging sludge that death metal was all about and really took that heaviness aspect to the next level. And he also used the introduction of drummer Bill Andrews to his advantage. Bill Andrews would bring this ominous groove on the kit that would easily back Chuck's eerie guitar sound and reinvent the way death metal was going to sound. To be honest, up until this point, the drumming on death metal records hadn't been too different from a typical thrash beat. But on these first two tracks, we can start to tell how death metal drumming was going to be formed and molded going forward, with more galloping between the snare and the toms, with the heavy thud of that double bass backing the screams and growls bursting from Chuck's throat. And this is where we started to see a more methodical approach to drumming as opposed to the very frantic thrash metal beats that we had heard before. There's much more groove and feel to the drumming present on this album than those earlier records or much of thrash's catalog, and Bill Andrews is a huge part of that. He's pretty much unheard of and unheralded for his work here, which is very unfortunate. I can't even find any proper B-roll to put here for him. Of course, we can't continue forward without talking about Rick Rozz, the boss.
Who made the most, but let's make a toast.
Not Rick Ross, it's Rick Rozz. Rick Rozz absolutely shreds alongside Chuck on this album, and this album only. He went on to form the band Massacre, but nothing Massacre ever really did could touch his work here on Leprosy. Playing and writing some of death metal's most influential riffs and mind-bending solos is no small feat, and it's unfortunate that he's not recognized more in the metal community. Now, a lot of the solos that he and Chuck are playing on this album are really reminiscent of that early Kerry King, Jeff Hanneman kind of guitar beat down kind of solo. They're not the best solos in Death's catalog, but that's the way death metal really was at the start. But solos notwithstanding, this is some of the heaviest shit of all time 30 plus years later. this album bangs and is top notch even 30 plus years later. And of course, a huge reason for that is Morris Sound Studios sound engineer Scott Burns. Without this beauty, this album doesn't go nearly as hard or sound nearly as dense and heavy. Hell, there's probably no Florida death metal scene at all. He basically started the whole Florida scene with this album, an incredible legacy. That raw, dense sound heard here would characterize basically the rest of the scene going forward, with bands like Cannibal Corpse, Suffocation, Atheist, and even Cynic relying on his masterful composition and engineering capabilities to drive them forward. This album was a culmination of what would eventually become and explode into death metal. Riffs, the drumming, Chuck's vocals, the solos, the sound engineering would all come to define a genre for a generation, even to this day. You can hear the layering of each instrument on so many modern day acts like Revocation, Undeath, and Gatecreeper. Those bands wouldn't exist without this album and the guys who crafted it. Leprosy was not the first death metal album, but it was the first death metal album to really change the game, to really push death metal to the next level and make it its own genre, to scream to the world, this is what death metal is, and this is what it's going to sound like for the next 30 plus years. And that's how Leprosy changed death metal forever. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate all your support, and let me know how much you love Leprosy down below. We will see you in the next episode. Long live metal.